talk. Hopefully it'll certainly colour the discussions going forward on resource classification, and I've got my 2 cents worth that I'll put in later on. I'll open it up to the floor for a few questions. Got any?
I think over this.
Yep.
Thanks for a good talk, Michael. I certainly appreciate the favorable comments about the UNFC there. We have strived early on in the development to account for social and environmental impacts in the classification system. But however, they are a bit weak at the moment, and we do recognize that. In fact, we have a working group within the EGRC right now actively endeavoring to enhance and expand the guidance around those social license and environmental issues. Whether that'll mean the definition of new categories within the system, or new specifications, or just new guidelines, we're not really certain yet. But we will be enhancing those in the future, and we're definitely looking to work with you on what you're doing here in India to make sure that's taken into. Okay, you've got the best pilots right now.
I have no comment other than we have found the UNFC is a great starting point, but I think that in the Indian context, there are probably some enhancements that will be undertaken. We had a comment here, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. One small question. In terms of social licensing, as far as the land-based mining is concerned, it's quite understandable. When we talk about deep seabed mining regime, could you expand on the implications of social licensing, number one? Number two, I'm also not in a position to sort of appreciate the sustainable development element in terms of deep seabed mineral regime. Thank you.
I mean, it's a curiosity to me, the social license to operate. I think it could be broadened here to in deep sea mining context. I think that there is a metallurgical dimension to this when you come on shore.
Outside.
Right, it's outside, right.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, it's a curiosity to me. When I was getting ready to come to this, I was sitting thinking about this. How will this work with these principally small island states?
And the sustainable development part. The sustainable development part as well.
The sustainable development part most immediately is probably going to go to a point that Caitlin raised this morning, which is there has to be an effective benefit sharing scheme. So let's say that we have a small island state that is undertaking deep sea mining, and they have a revenue stream coming in. I think that immediately there would have to be clarity on how that revenue is to be used, right? Is it going into recurrent things in the budget like education, or is it going to special projects? And I think that probably as part of that, there would also be a question of how could you leverage the mining industry to broader economic development. So if you look at nations that have done very well with mining, they have all gone through a transformation where the economy actually becomes more diverse through time. Australia or Canada, right? So they start out narrowly mining, and then the economy diversified. You actually can try and push an economy in that direction using some of the revenues that you have, again, through industry clusters and other things. So I think that that's probably in the deep sea mining context, that's something to think about, is that if this is a small island state today and they have 3 sources of income, what can we do to broaden it, diversify?
I had a chill go down my back because part of the history of the Law and Sea negotiations, which is the root of the DSM system, is the sovereign equality of states. That there was a time where it was thought that developed countries would try to push policies on developing countries. And so there's a strong, well, that's one reason why we make decisions by consensus. Even when the rules provide a majority vote, we make decisions by consensus so that everyone can have a say, including the NGOs who are not only vocal but have states that will present their views. But the idea of presenting it as the authority can make countries do something is probably a counterproductive presentation. If it's done through education, and in fact when we had a stakeholder survey of transparency principles were raised is how do we implement these in our context? So a lot of it I think has to be done, convince everyone this is the right thing to do, and then get consensus rather than have the authority say, oh, this is the right thing to do and try to impose it through contracts. I mean, I think I agree with where you're going. I just have that.
Well, I didn't suggest all the authority would have any power.
It was just a chill in my
Yeah.
back of another couple of years of negotiation I'd like to avoid.
You know, we observed, you know, the USGS used to put a publication out called Deposits on the Shelf, and it showed all of the resources in the world that were actually commercially viable, but not in production, of which there were many. And from that, what you get is a sovereign state hasn't created the enabling environment for the operation. So transparency and other elements come into play. This is a sovereign state issue, and not necessarily something for the authority at the time.
Yes?
The authorities don't engage no matter which country gets a license. Big, small, they're totally not involved in. We have our own issues. There's a royalty, there's a payment that is made by the contract. We have to take that royalty or that payment and set up a system to distribute it. During the time of the conference, the idea was that there'd be land-based producer states that would suffer as a result of deep seabed mining. And part of these proceeds were supposed to go to these states for compensation. Yeah? Contracts that are given out by the authority have nothing to do with the size of the country. Yeah? They can be small island producing states. They can be states the size of China, the size of India. So on that part of it, it's not clear to me what that has to do with the classification of the resources of the area, because contracts have been given to Tonga, contracts have been given to China, contracts have been given to India, and so on and so forth. So all this other business really does not enter our calculus. Yeah? I'm not sure what the social benefit thing we're talking about is, but it certainly doesn't have to do with the size of any island, state, country, what have you. They have to satisfy some requirements by the way of being able to show that the entity that is going to undertake the activities is qualified in terms of its technical capability, its financial capability, but the rest of it is completely irrelevant. Okay? Thank you.
We might have
Question in the back.
time for one more question.
If I could just, it may well as much be a comment as a question. Last year I was involved in a development aid program that we're running in Papua New Guinea. So we're dealing with the Mineral Resources Authority of Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a country that's very heavily dependent upon resources, and there's 7 large mines in that country. Those 7 large mines do reporting back to the Mineral Resources Authority, and it comes in an inconsistent, this is where it comes into the ISA considerations. That reporting comes back to the Mineral Resources Authority in an inconsistent way. So the Mineral Resources Authority has to put a lot of person time, human time, resourcing, into massaging the information that comes in into a form so it's consistent. So one of the outcomes of the aid memoir last year was that the Mineral Resources Authority of PNG wanted assistance with turning that information or getting the way of getting that information into a consistent Excel spreadsheet. This all sounds very simple, but I think it's pretty similar to the issues we're facing here. We want to have a very easy framework to report with so that you're not having to massage data, so that you're not having to have data being changed, people being involved, and it's just fairly simple. And I guess what sparked it in my mind was you mentioned that it's what are countries that are getting the new investment, it's about sort of governance structures and how important governance structures are. Well, this is like a fundamental governance matter, is to have a systematic way of recognising what your resources are, and then hopefully when it happens, or if it happens, what your production is. So
Yeah,
it's as
that's-
much a comment
Yeah,
as
it
a...
is. Yeah, it's the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. It's a terrific analog, I think, to what you're doing here. Because they had to look at definitions of payment types, definitions of different things, materiality, right? And then they built a system, and it fits under the Sustainable Development Framework in PMG. It's probably a good analog to unfortunately.
Thanks.
I think we can have one more question.
Thanks, Matthew, and thank you, Michael, for that talk. What is confusing me, I think, at the moment is what this all means for the seabed authority and where it's at this point in time. I mentioned earlier on where I see the LCC having challenges at the moment dealing with coming to the end of 15-year contracts, as well as looking forward to the exploitation regulations. I'm wondering whether, in fact, what I'm hearing, without actually saying it so much, is that the challenge that I referred to at this particular point in time must be looked at as actually an opportunity for the Seabed Authority to move forward and get it right. Because in looking at the criteria that are going to be required for any contractor after 15 years, which is looking for an extension, for say, up to 5 years, is it not the opportunity to say whatever's been happening in the past, some of what you've presented and what is being said from the UN system is the way to go for the future. But we are not going to get there tomorrow or at the time when any application for extension is approved. But what perhaps is the opportunity is to build into that extension approval the requirements over the 5 years, say, of the extension, to have the contractors have in place the data requirements not only on the resource side, but also on the environmental, and if there are social implications, the social side. So that it's a forward-looking, opportunistic, if you want to put it that way, approach, rather than any other way. And I'm thinking out loud here now, and I'm speaking as an individual rather than anything else. And I just see what, Michael, what you're saying and some of what I heard earlier as being worked into an opportunity rather than continue to look at it as a challenge. And this two-stage process that we're dealing with at the LPC, renewal of existing licenses, that will obviously help us guide the new applicants that have just got licenses moving forward for the next 15 years. But also, it will surely feed in to support those criteria that are essential, however you wish to describe them on the resource side or on the environmental side, for looking forward to what has to be embedded in the exploitation regulations, which must be in place within the next 2 to 3 years. I am simply asking myself that question and sharing it with you all as to what is in this discussion right now for the ISA and the work of its Legal and Technical Commission in the next year or so.
Well, thank you, Michael. I think we're over time, so... one more. Okay.
The application of the Sustainable Development Framework is currently done through the decision on financing. And you have World Bank. So if it's national governments making the decision, guidance coming from other places. So I'm not sure that the Seabed Authority needs to be in the role if we have these other ways already in progress. So I want to continue the debate, because I think this is worth exploring and keeping it tied with both the original intent and the application of sustainable development principles.
Okay.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, okay. Go for it.
Well, I'm not sure if I understand a lot of things said here. I'm asking a question to myself. Are we not complicating the task of system of resource classification at this point of time for taking into account factors beyond purely the technical factors? I mean, we are nowhere near concluding all the technical factors today. And on that, if we superpose all the additional factors which go into this stage of project formulation, which probably is much beyond probably a decade or more than a decade. And therefore, should we not restrict for today's deliberations to considerations that directly affect, so shall we say, short-term classification approach? I mean, this is the question that came to my mind, and maybe.
Okay, well, we should break for coffee right now and then continue the discussion later. Thank you.
I don't have a question. I just want to point out, Mike, the Seabed Authority was established to administer the global commons. These are territories which have mineral resources that are beyond the jurisdiction of any state. The process by which we work, the governance issues relate to the Seabed Authority and the various stakeholders. We, the International Seabed Authority, through our membership and the organs that we have, we are responsible for the rules, regulations, and procedures governing the prospecting for, exploration of, and exploitation of these mineral resources. We do not get into individual states and their practices. In our case, at this workshop, our problem is the fact that their resources, they are reported on to us on an annual basis. Among the work that has to be done in terms of the reporting is to provide us with information on the resources in areas to which member states are allowed to go and conduct these activities, prospecting, exploration, and exploitation. There's no part of our work that requires us to look at the details of the governance of any of those individual states. You're with me? Okay. Okay.
If I could just reflect, I have a sense that you're speaking to the room and not me.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, because I present terrestrial mining. What I think I hear you say is that these mining companies are in a different space because they have to go to the same global markets as the terrestrial mining companies for financing. So I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree. So maybe I'll let you continue to speak to me, but I think you're actually speaking to.
I'm speaking to the room.
I sense there's some conversation hasn't taken place.
No. I'm speaking to the room. I'm looking at the time we have, and I'm trying to get at an objective. I have resources in the deep seabed. The resources I have in the deep seabed are reported to me. We've gone through a process for a period of time. In the end, the biggest problem I have is the various contractors are not reporting on these resources in what appears to me in a standardized fashion. I am trying to find out a way, utilizing to the extent possible the practices for land-based mining, right? But to get better reporting, get better information on the resources of the global commons. That's what I'm really trying to get out of this. I take it that it's good to have a discussion, but I would like to keep the framework intact. I can't change it. That's what the convention gave us, yeah? So if I can take whatever the practices are in land-based mining and make the necessary adjustment for these resources of the global commons, I'd be a happy man. Because I don't have much time I have about a year, a little over a year, to be able to get at this very point to hopefully get an extension to exploration contracts that we have, and that I've noted that I'm not happy about what is being reported to the organization. So I got a little bit excited talking about the governance. It's the seabed authority that is the government in this case. Everybody else who's participated, who gets an exploration contract, should provide us some information. I'm not getting it. It's not standard what I'm getting. And I'm trying to get to a point of getting everybody to buy in to some standards. I have my own ideas as to what I think a good template is. I think it's a process to get there. I hope we can get to that process by the end of the week, whether it's to take an existing template and modify it, yeah, and say, okay, this could be used for the mineral resources of the global commons, for reporting on them. But that's really what I'm trying to do. I just got excited because while I fully appreciate the work for individual nation states considered as individual governance entities, in this case, I don't have the power to go there. The work that is being done, the resources that are being addressed, do not fall into it. That's really what I'm saying. And I'm suggesting that I'd like for us to look at it that way. And if we can adjust some land-based practices or templates that we have for reporting on these resources to suit this particular framework we're working out of, I'd be a happy camper. That's all I'm saying. But it's very, very
I think you're talking to the room, so maybe the room should address you.
Okay, fine, good enough. Please go ahead.
Is there anyone else that wants to have a quick question, or should we get going? No, don't see any hands. Okay. Caitlin?
We have a bit of delay, but I think this is also important to have these discussions. Now we will proceed with Caitlin. The title of in the agenda is quite different from this one, but I think the matter is exactly the same. Caitlin, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, this is the afternoon. It must be my second presentation. Before I get to this, one of the things that Michael raised, and I'm not contending with you on this one, he raised the guidance that agriculture, and I'd like to list all of the points. One must consider the situation. What is the geographical and geological situation?
Yes. What is the geological and geographical situation of the deposit? What are the conditions? What is the mineralogic and mining questions that have to be addressed? What is the water availability? Because at least on land, water is a key issue in mining. It's certainly a different question than deep sea bed mining. What are the roads? But think of that as what is the infrastructure needed for mining? The climate, in this case, the ocean climate, the ocean conditions, the oceanography as well. What is the right of ownership? And we address that through the Law of the Sea Convention. And finally, what are the neighbors? What does it mean when you develop? What's it going to do to the people around you, and what are they going to do to you? So I just want to point out that whole list is stuff that we still grapple with. So now we're going to address the issue of reports, and I hope that this addresses a lot of what you want in terms of identifying the different types of reports, things that are expected from anyone who wants to move forward with mining in a commercial environment. this, as I say, from Agricola on, we have 450 years of addressing mineral issues. And I just want to point out again, it's the 35th anniversary. It's the 35th anniversary of the first public scoping study, the lowest level of integrated assessment of a mining operation. We really have two broad categories. We have technical reports, those that look at, say, the collector. Actually gave us a bit of a technical report, or the summary of a technical report on the mining collector. We'll hear some of the report on the Tonga proposal to develop that, which is a technical report. It didn't try to address economic issues, but it did an excellent job of addressing the resource at that level of data, and leads into a discussion of how would we do this. So it lays the groundwork to move forward. I've listed them as integrated economic assessments. That is not an official term. I just found it a handy categorization. It's one that integrates all the factors involved in development and does it through an economic lens, brings everything together into at least one measure of internal rate of return, and probably many measures, but a key measure of how does this stack up against other development opportunities. These are the basic factors that go into doing an integrated economic assessment. Information about the property, where is it, what are its dimensions, the geology and resources, what are the minerals there that we want to develop, and what's their situation within that region. How would we recover them? What is our mining approach? What is our processing approach for the ore? As I say, as you mentioned earlier, it's a question of how do you get things to what you're going to sell. What is the infrastructure you need? I mean, if you have an ocean mine, you've got to have ports to bring the minerals to. What are management and labor? Where are you going to hire people? How are you going to house them? How much are you going to pay them? What are the labor requirements, the legal issues under both international and national law? What are the products that you're going to produce? What are the markets? What are you likely to make from sale? What are the environmental and permitting requirements? Financial issues, how much do you have to pay, both to a national government and to the international community? And what are the development costs and schedules? And schedules are very important. The time value of money is why we look at internal rate of return rather than just a simple payback or other measure. We have political and social conditions that work into the decision in some way. And we have overall project economics. So these are the things that get assessed when you try to bring all of this together to see what the mining opportunity looks like. There are actually 4 levels of study, although we're going to focus on 3 of them. The scoping study, which is a very introductory level. It's more than a back-of-the-envelope calculation, but it is limited in what it can draw on. It won't draw on necessarily in seabed mining case on actual numbers of assessments of abundance and grade in an area. It will take just a general number that it represents what you hope that area has based on the general information. It could begin with the work within the ISA model. But it does report an internal rate of return as a measure. And it is used to decide whether to move forward and what direction to move forward. But that it helps you choose between alternative designs, decide where to put your next quantum of development capital, where to put your time, what expertise you need to bring in. It's one of your first course corrections on your way to a real development. The pre-feasibility study is where it begins to get really serious. It uses actual numbers from the seabed. You're sampling, and you need to decide how often you need to sample to be able to interpolate information. You need your geographic information to know what your likely mineable area is. But you're still working in some degree of generality. You need to have a definition of technology. It may not be your final technology, it may not be your best technology, but it's technology you're confident would work, so that you might use a well-practiced processing route that doesn't give you quite as much recovery of one particular metal, and I'm particularly thinking of some of the hydrometallurgical processes for nickel laterites that might be applied to nodules, some of which get a fairly low recovery of cobalt, while other ones get a higher recovery, but currently they take a bit more work to get to be running effectively. So this is still a chance to choose between your technological directions. But if you are picking a technology and there's still one better, it's giving you a cautious approach. But it's giving one that's still based on the actual numbers. And then the full feasibility study, you're settling down on a particular design and saying, if we do this, should we move ahead? And you're still getting the economic assessment, you're getting a lot more detail, and you're using much more finely grained results from the mineral resource that you're going through more closely and developing a model that's much more strict. You can actually lay out a mine plan, decide where you want to take your collector through the region to do your mining, at least for the first couple of years. The final is a engineering design study, and that's where you take the results from the feasibility study, any final changes you want to make, and figuring out how much the whole project's really going to cost, and going through and talking to vendors, getting numbers, using the best design approaches you have, going through and deciding your final plans for what you're going to order. Now here are a few details, a little more depth in the scoping study. It's an order, in this case, the definition, this is from Crisco, or it's the one that's on the Crisco website. It's an order of magnitude study of technical and economics on the potential viability of the mineral resources, including assessments of realistically assumed modifying factors, with any other relevant operations.
Move ahead to preparing a pre-feasibility study. That's the decision point. If you don't find the results of the scoping study satisfactory, you might just quit and go to another property. Here we go. Or you might decide to modify your design and circle back around to do another scoping study based on those changes. The principal technique, or one of the principal techniques for determining cost, is a factored approach, where you identify the major pieces of equipment and then use common engineering factors to work that up into an installed and integrated system. So if you know that you're going to have
a roasting oven in a process, you'll get the cost of that and then apply the appropriate factors to work up to an installed cost. Or you may have a larger system that you can apply those numbers to. And that gives you a range of accuracy that seems, in the mining area, seems to average around 45% up or down. As we see, this is a scoping study. It's to give you a general sense, not a detailed response. It just assumes ore values. It doesn't require you to be out there doing all your data collection and developing a grid and interpolating values along that. It's used to take the best information you have and apply that as an input into your designs and to your economic calculations. It is not used for reporting reserves or resources, that in large part because it's not based on a lot of actual data. You cannot determine reserves or resources from just a scoping study. So that requires you, oh, and the cost of doing this, and this is a real rule of thumb, the cost of, if you know the capital expense of your overall project, about 0.1% to 0.3% would go into this level of study. That's the engineering work it takes to get this complete. A pre-feasibility study is where you start getting more definitive answers. It's a comprehensive study of options, so that you can go through and say, what happens if this is a metal price? What if it's 25% above or 25% below? What happens if we use a high-pressure acid leach instead of atmospheric pressure acid leach? What happens if we use 2 smaller mine ships instead of 1 large mine ship? So that you get a chance to go through and do a sensitivity analysis and make choices based on its economic outlook and other factors. It can be used to determine a mineral resource, and if it's sufficiently accurate, and I'll need Pat to confirm, it can be used to determine a reserve. I'm trying to be very careful and not give you bad information. The cost estimations on this, 30% plus or minus. And finally, the rough rule of thumb cost on this, 0.2 to 0.8% of the capital expense. Now, since we're talking possibly a $3 billion integrated operation, we aren't talking small change here. But it's just to give you a rule of thumb of how much work you're going to have to put in to get to this stage. Now, this really is one of these essential decision points. It would provide the authority a lot of information about the reserves and resources, and it would demonstrate that you have determined an operation can be profitable. That is the goal, is to see whether there is a high likelihood of a viable operation. The feasibility study is really one of the key go, no-go decisions. It's based on much more precise estimates of cost, going through a specific design and costing it out. It's based on much more detailed sampling of the seabed and developing of your model so that you know the resource in much more confidence, one that you can go through and say, okay, if we follow this track, we'll be getting the nodules we want. And it can be used to, in some cases, this is called a bankable feasibility study. That's not an official term, but it gives you a sense of what this can be used for. That you can go to your lenders with this, and they'll have a fairly high degree of confidence that it's reasonably accurate. In this case, the accuracy is generally about 15% up or down. And it's, again, more expensive. It runs about 0.5% to 1.5% of your capital expense. But this is the point. When you've done this, you're ready to start making agreements with people that they're going to give you money and you're planning on making a return for it. So this is the third of the 3 studies. The final design study is really where you take this and start laying out all the work you need to contract with people to do to build your system and get it operational. I want to take you through a case study. This is the one that was done for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to help determine issues and policies for seabed mining back in the late 1970s. As it turned out, it was used to help develop the financial arrangements, trying to find a balance between the extreme views of the Western industrialized countries and the African states to find a compromise that could work and could be not overly burdensome but provide a significant share of revenue. It was developed for these reasons, initially to evaluate design. Actually, it was developed initially to get me out of graduate school. And for that, it was used to evaluate design changes and effects of regulatory constraints on a seabed mining operation. It was done through factored estimation and by taking comparable systems from existing operations, scaling them up, and putting them into the model. So it was a basic estimate. It could be considerably up or down from the numbers that it calculated, but that was handled by doing sensitivity analysis. As I described for scoping studies, it used the numbers that were provided by industry and say, no, this is what the ore you can expect to find. In this case, it used about 1.3% nickel, 1.1% copper, 0.24% cobalt, and did not recover manganese as a product. it broke the design down into 10 sectors. Preparatory costs, the R&D that was left to be done, the continuing exploration program required to get those numbers to move forward to a pre-feasibility study, the mining system, the marine transport, which turned out to be much more expensive than we initially thought, to move from the mine site to shore for processing. And then once you get it to shore, you've got to take it off the ship and transport it over land to wherever you're doing the processing. And at a later point, take it out of the processing plant and take it to wherever you're doing waste disposal. The processing plant, which is the big ticket item, in this model, it ran close to 50% of the total cost. It's a big, complicated project that has its own infrastructure requirements, so that you have to put a lot of work. You may be thinking you're doing a seabed mining project, but you're doing a mineral processing project as well. Waste disposal, you're creating between 1 and 3 million tons per year of something that as yet we don't have an alternative use for, so you're probably disposing of it in a landfill. And where your plant is probably not a place that's going to want a landfill, so that you have to transport it, probably by slurry pipeline. And then we have marine support, because when you're working 1,000 miles from shore and have to shift your crews, you have to be able to take supplies out, take replacement crews, so you're dealing with millions of dollars within that sector. General administration, you've got to make this work. I mean, it's not just the people in the plant, but there's a home office and a lot of work in marketing and other things that require personnel. And there's the continuing preparations. While you have the operation going, you still have to do your detailed exploration a couple of years ahead of time. So you always have your exploration operation ongoing in parallel with the recovery operation. So this is what the scoping study identified. You could break this down in greater detail, particularly the processing plant. But this was pretty inclusive in terms of what needed to be calculated. The study was done in 3 iterations. The first was very simple. I might say back of the envelope. The second, though, was done after bringing industry in. That's when I got to meet John Shaw, along with the other Ocean Mining Consortia, who all contributed to what we should do to make it better. We worked out the development schedule. How many years more exploration and development do you have to do before you can begin constructing your plant? And how long will your construction take? We had between 3 and 5 years, and how much will you spend each of those years? How long are you going to operate, and how long will it take you to ramp up to full operation? How effective will you be? So we could draw from land-based processing for a lot of these. It wasn't all pulled from the air. It was talking to people who have laterite processing plants and saying, how did your startup go? So we brought that information together, and that gave us a baseline number based on our assumptions, and then we provided a series of iterations that said, what if we're wrong on commodity price? What if we underestimated our capital by 50%? What if we underestimated or overestimated our capital expense by, well, I think we used 25% as our extreme. The same on metals. We looked at individual metals. We looked through a whole range of variables to see which it was most sensitive to, and then put some more work in that. That was the model that came out in 1978 and was introduced to the Law of the Sea negotiations. And by using a series of these individual studies, individual scenarios, we used 6 of them to cover the issues that appeal to the different interest groups in the negotiations. We were able to support the evaluation of a series of environmental, taxation systems to see under which case was a progressive tax better, was a royalty better, how could you combine the two, did you have a fixed annual fee? A range of those things were pulled together until we could work out something that led, between creative compromise and outright exhaustion, led to adoption of a very complicated system, but one that minimally satisfied all parties. The model was revised again in 1984, reissued again, with much greater detail, with the exception of still relying on assumed values of the minerals. It approached being a full pre-feasibility study. The Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration hired Dames and Moore to produce a model system for processing, and that was used using a factored approach to define processing costs, so that we had at least a system that should work. It probably wasn't as effective as one that could be developed, but it was one that gave numbers there. So this is what went through in the course of this. Over the long term, it took 6 years. It took about 3 years to revise the original model into this 1984 model. In addition to having a copy of the presentation, I've given the Secretariat a copy of that model as well. I mean, it is now, in 1984, it's 30 years old in its final version. But you might find that the way it was done instructive. The co-lead author, Michael Triantafalo, is now the head of the Center for Ocean Engineering at MIT. And he had me up last year to speak to the ocean engineering group about the current state of seabed mining. So hopefully MIT is getting back involved as well. By the way, the 1984 model came out with an internal rate of return of about 9%, significantly below what anyone would put their money into. But that was at a time about 5 years after metal prices began to stagnate, while inflation kept costs going up. So it was not until 2000 that we began to see that change. And as metal prices went up, see the re-emergence of seabed mining was an attractive opportunity. So the closing points I want to make are economic measures are the ones that are brought to bring all this together. That is, and in many ways in seabed mining, the social issues are brought in as economic terms, either through the cost of revenue sharing, the cost of training programs, the cost of whatever technology transfer is done. There are a number of things that have social impact, but they're measured for the company in terms of, if we do all these social activities, does this remain an attractive program for us? So that's why this is particularly valuable, even when you're looking at non-economic factors. Scoping and feasibility studies serve both the design, are we doing the right thing, do we want to go this way, and the decision function. Are we going to go ahead? If you've invested $10 million in doing studies, and it says you're only going to get 9%, if you do this in any time in the feasible future, you're probably going to look for a different place to put your money. If it comes up and says 15 to 20%, you'll probably stick with it, unless you see some particularly visible hazard in the near future. When you do these studies, you need to say, what happens if we're wrong on one of the assumptions, and go both ways. It's terribly easy in these to incorporate your own biases. And generally, if you're working on a project, your bias is, I'd really like this to work. So, and in fact, I have a study that indicates under what conditions and how much the bias is likely to come out. It was very entertaining to read that, because the statistics were pretty good at looking at, oh, this is what they said it would cost, this is what it really costs, and here's where they made their error. And often it is that internal bias of, I want this to work, and a little bit of unintentional fudging of figures that leads to that. These studies, actually, if you go to the internet and start searching for a pre-feasibility study, and minerals, you'll turn up quite a lot. So there's a lot of guidance if you want to see what actually gets done and what becomes public. Because to the degree these are used to justify going to somebody and asking for $100 million or $1 billion, those are going to get out. And they have to, because they need to be able to stand the light of day. So these studies that would be done for the Seabed Authority, if they're involved in the approval process for exploitation, they'll need to follow these rules. And these are governed by the same large body of rules that apply to the determination of reserves and resources. They're part of national laws and international codes that say these are the right ways to do this, because it's going to be a public document. So if a seabed miner wants to be part of the mining industry, they need to follow the same rules. So that's something for all of us to learn and incorporate into our decision making. That's it.
Thank you very much, and we have some time for questions. We have questions or comments? Yes.
Definitely. Not really a question, but a remark to prevent that wrong ideas are circulating. You just mentioned the return of 15% as an adequate return for business.
The internal rate of return generally, for the most part, a 15% internal rate of return, which is different than rate of return, would be. It would be a bottom line.
The point I want to make, because I think it's important in the rest of the discussion that is going to follow within the International Seabed Authority, once it comes to royalties, etc. One should not forget that this is a very risky business. And normally your rate goes up in accordance with the risk that is attached to your investment. So I doubt whether in the industry you will find any people that will support it at 15%.
And also with the
Is it on? Oh, good. With the different levels of certainty at the different levels of study, 15% on a detailed feasibility study is more attractive than 15% on a pre-feasibility study or 15% on a scoping study, because those range of errors tend to make you a little more nervous when you don't have a lot of detail.
Well, you know approximately what the numbers are that are involved. So once you went through all these investments, I think once you're operational, you look at more than 15%.
I think it depends on a number of factors. One of which is, have you done this before? So you have more confidence in the cost. But the more risk you take, yes, the higher premium you put on your baseline. Although it used to be that mining would, on average, turn out about 10%. So, but it just use that as a guide, and that as risk increases, you want to move to a higher number. But people, when they were forecasting 15%, they were still looking at it seriously. So it's been a while since then.
The studies are very important for resource and reserve classification. I think the three studies, scoping studies, pre-feasibility studies, and feasibility studies, the content almost the same. The difference is the depth, the study depth. That means how detailed the information available. I want to go back to the deep sea polymetallic Yudo development studies. My question is that, is it the time today to carry out pre-feasibility study for more polymetallic Yudo development? We know that there are some contracts would be expired by the end of 2016. That would strongly affect the authorities if they make decision that if is it a time that the information is detailed enough to carry out pre-feasibility study. That means the reserves could be estimated. The contract should be ended and to apply for mining license. Okay? If the time is not the time, okay, the technical and economic information is not detailed enough. That means the reserve could not be estimated. The license should be, the exploration license should be extended. So this is a very critical issue, I think, for the authority to make decisions. So I want to know your opinion. Is it the time to carry out pre-feasibility study for deep sea on the technical development?
Personally, I want to say yes, because I want to see seabed mining go ahead under the appropriate environmental and financial conditions.
But I think you have to determine that if you have the information, if you have gathered the information suitable to do first a scoping study, you should do the scoping study. That not just continue doing more research and not making that first financial evaluation. Because if the financial evaluation says don't go ahead, you save money by stopping then. But if you get at least a scoping study would give the authority indications that there's serious work going on. A pre-feasibility study would allow the determination of certainly resources and quite possibly reserves, which would be even more powerful indication. There's still a time frame between going from pre-feasibility to feasibility to construction. And I wouldn't move to a pre-feasibility study until I've done a scoping study. But I wouldn't want to put anything off if it looked like it was, I wanted to move ahead. I think that operations stagnate if you don't keep on the path. So I would say that just keep moving those upward that chain. It does have to be the date of renewal of a license that you would be ready to operate. You might want to go right into an exploitation license as soon as possible. If you think the markets are going to be down, you might
To gather more information, do the scoping study, but postpone your expenses. If you view the expense of doing that study to be too high at that time. I mean, we are talking millions of dollars in doing these studies, but then again, you're probably spending millions of dollars on research in the lab and at sea. It's probably, if you're doing that, it's probably time to move ahead into doing your economic analysis. And then working with the seabed authority to see how that fits with the regulations that will be developed. I'd love to give you a yes, move ahead, but I'm going to be a little cautious with giving financial advice.
If you say yes, you should answer the question, what's the confidence for that information? If you say yes, you should give the answer, like what's your confidence for the technical parameters and economic parameters.
Well, that's
uncertainty.
Yes, and both the scoping study and the pre-feasibility study need to address that uncertainty and need to address specifically what happens if different assumptions are made. I mean, that's critical to moving forward. It doesn't prevent you from moving forward, but it helps make sure you're making it under the best informed conditions.
Thank you, just for having time to listen more questions.
Thank you for your presentation. And Peyton just talked about the pilot mining tested in 1978. I guess that the background is that the people predicted that maybe commercial deep sea mining will happen during the end of the last century. This is my guess that the background is that because people can see the future for the commercial mining development. And then later that maybe in 1980s, the market has changed. So that's my understanding. So my question is that just to follow my colleagues. So what's concerning the deep-sea mining, what's the relationship between the pre-feasibility study or feasibility study and the economic circumstances? Say that the prediction of commercial production, that's very important. So my guess is that when we can see the predicted time for the commercial production, then certainly it's a time for us to study, to study such type of studies. Thank you.
We have two more questions at least, one from here, another from John. Okay, briefly, very briefly, yes.
Thank you. But I'm not talking about the pre-feasibility. My question is, are we ready for scoping studies? In the case of land-based deposits, the advantage is that we have analogous deposits. We have analogous mining schemes. We have analogous process plants from where we can derive information, build up in the system, and project the capital cost, the operating cost, and do all the sensitivity analysis that we can all imagine. What do we have in terms of deep seabed mining? I don't think we have any design information for the mining systems. In terms of process plant, for the 3 metals, I can still pick up some information from, let's say, nickel-based plants. But if I'm going for recovery of manganese in some form, let's say some alloys, I do not have a single plant in the world using low-grade manganese, low-grade leach residue containing 25% manganese. How do I do the estimates for manganese recovery plant? And therefore, my view simply is that unless we have experimental data, even on a very small scale, we are not ready for the scoping studies also. That's my question. Thank you.
Any comment or can we? Okay, John.
One way to look at the studies is to say they all ask very different questions. And if you don't get a positive answer to your question, you really shouldn't go to the next study. But you are allowed to go back and redo the old study if, for example, you think you made a mistake or if circumstances have changed. So a scoping study or a concept study, if you like, the key question there is, can it be done? Now, of course, you want to know if it's going to make money or anything like that, but you do it at a fairly high level. But you're not even too fussed about how you're going to do it. You just want to see that there is a technical solution out there, and it's got reasonable prospects of giving you a good enough return or profit or something out of it. The second study, the pre-feasibility study, we used to call them select studies, just to try and really emphasize the fact of the question is quite different, which is, what is the best way to do it? Because there's nothing worse than being railroaded with some apparently brilliant concept that either has a fatal flaw or makes you less competitive than your neighbour that's thought of something a bit better. So you shouldn't start your pre-fees until you've convinced yourself that you can do it. And then you should reopen that can of worms and really look at the alternatives. And then at the end of the pre-fees, you will pick what you think is the best way forward. And then that'll be locked down. And then the feasibility study asks a third question, which is, how much is it really going to cost? How much profit am I really going to make? But this is in detail now. That's why it's bankable, because it's not up to the engineers or the geologists or the metallurgists anymore. It's up to the hard-nosed bankers to believe in what you're going to do. And they're going to be very skeptical about everything. So sometimes actually a pre-feasibility study costs more than a feasibility study, because you're looking at so many options and it can be a little bit complicated, whereas you might find that if you've got a fairly simple process, your fees is more straightforward. So that addresses some of the other points that other people picked up. If the contractors don't think they can do it, they're probably not yet ready for a pre-feasibility study. But if they do think they can do it, then there's no reason to sit around. We should move forward.
I think on the the scoping studies or concept studies, he said. You can go through on the seabed mining part by, I mean, you can come with a number that is certainly order of magnitude by looking at the ship that you need, because you need a ship to hold everything up, to provide power, to provide mobility, to suspend and maintain the pipe string. You need a pipe string. You can price that out. You can start with some of the work that Ted provided earlier to get some of the numbers to do that. You have to have a number that you can assign to the collector, both in terms of price and collector efficiency. But you could use ranges for that. Now, that part of the operation, while it is expensive, is a small part of the overall cost of the project. So you, even with a high degree of inaccuracy in estimating those costs, you can still get a ballpark figure for the overall project, relying more on the ability to estimate all these other costs and those other 9 factors. So yes, you can go ahead and do that, and then you can start saying, well, what do we need to do in terms of designing this component? Is it too expensive as we look at it now, or is there something else we can do? But you'll find in the MIT model that the way they did the pipe string and the ship, the biggest unknown was the collector, both in terms of, as I say, the cost and the effectiveness of it. But then you can start getting a range to say, what happens if it's very good at the bottom, very bad on the bottom? What happens with lower ore grade? It gives you a tool to start deciding where you need to put your next increment of development effort.
So are we any wiser today compared to MIT 78 level studies?
I hope by now, after close to 15 years, the pioneer investors have a lot more information than we had.
They have the information only on the in-situ resource on the ground, nothing beyond.
People have been developing and testing some of the collectors, so there should be some information. If not, then that's 15 years that
maybe
could have been done.
Maybe we can proceed, Sudhakar.
Yes, I think as an NTC member, I hope I will get an extra time to ask this question. In the sense, actually, I will add, something to her, presentation, and then I would like to ask you a question at the end of it. Actually, in fact, I'm anxious, as soon as I arrived here and all that. In fact, I have been anxious, in the sense, I have been into this game of, mineral resource assessment on the seabed, and we have been dreaming about it. I know we all started at the age of 23, 24. At that time, I was told, I think sometime by 1990 it is going to happen. And I was dreaming. I went on to dream, and I was being to as well to the sea. Again, exploration, it went on, going on and on. Again, I was told in around that time and on the sea, it is going to be the end of the century. Sure, it is going to happen. You don't worry about it. 2000 came in. I don't see anything except, as it has been, I think others have added that, no, we have our understanding of the institute. Resources have been improving. That's all. Other than that, I don't know. I think if anybody else has done any other studies, at least as to the LTC, we don't have any other information. In all the annual reports, we only see in terms of the abundance data, grade data has improved, grade estimates have improved and all, everything else has improved and all, and we are into a stage and all this thing. I think at the end of the day, it's an evolution that, we are trying to go to. And then at the end of, century, we have been told that, we don't know, when is it going to happen? But I think it was at that time, I think ISBA has started signing that, contracts with individual contractors. I think it was excellent. I think it happened as an excellent, step forward, from the PRAPCOM and all, we entered into a seabed authority regime, and then we started signing the contract. As soon as we started signing this, contract, contracts and all this thing, I'm sure that an optimism has grown. Someday we are going to have deep sea mining is going to happen. But I think I stopped here and all. I stopped dreaming, in the sense and all. I dreamt almost for the, almost, since 82, from the time India started this, game. I have no optimism in the sense and all. But at the same time, I'm optimistic about the, the kind of interest that is being driven into these resources since 2012. I think entire impetus has changed. But although impetus has changed and all, I don't see that we have got anything to address directly and all that. We are here, as far as I understand. I hope I don't hurt anybody in this statement that I make. I understand that we are here to define the classification of the resources of nodules. From there you have to come to a research. Actually, how do you address this issue? I don't know. I don't know whether pre-feasibility study information actually will it add to the classification of resources, or whether an investment of an I say it, as an investment of an X amount is going to add to our classification of resources. I think, ask me as a geologist, I see it in another way. Actually, I want to classify the resources on the ground. Actually, how do they occur? Actually, I'm interested to. I had in an area, given area, I had yesterday 100 million ton as a resource. I would like to drive from there to a stage that I'm sure at so and so confidence level. I want to say it is so much of an area, so much is going to be a reserve. So I don't see that we are driving into that. At the end of the day, the responsibility of us as an LTC group is that we are expected to drive something in from our side to the council. It has to be submitted at an earliest opportunity, and we are here to hear the experts and to have your guidance to us. I am not able to see that the so-called as a guidance in these few hours, except that we are only again addressing that issues of MIT has already addressed. I heard from other actually friends and all about 20-25 years back MIT has addressed. We are in the stage, we are at that stage only. We have not improved in terms of collector efficiency, in terms of whether it should be flexible mining or rigid mining. All have got, all have an approach of on their own. They have their own approach. Irrespective of it, I'm afraid that at the end of this, on Friday, shall we have some kind of guidance from you all as experts to us as an LTC that so and so are going to be the actually factors are an elements that should be definable in terms of the resources or classification of the resources on the seabed. That's all I would like to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir. I think that's why we have most contractors here and some other experts. So I think that until the end of the week we will have some answers to that. Any more questions or comments? Okay. Just to finish.
Very quickly. I find it a little bit as a contractor. One of these contractors that started in 2012 and that does this from an industrial point of view. I find it worrying that I hear here around the table where there are a number of experts saying there is no evolution, everything is standby, there is no possibility to do pre-feasibility designs. Well, might be news, but there might be even one or two contractors from these newly joined 2 years ago that have already done that. Might surprise you. They might have already done it. Because you all know that working 1 year on this project for each of the industrial parties costs a lot of money. If after 1 year we need to defend to our shareholders that we want to continue and that we need X number of money the next year, we need to be able to show something, and we need to be able to show them a plan of progress. What we do miss, and I think this is what this meeting is all about these days, is what we do miss is we need to make the project bankable. And to make the project bankable, you need to define, amongst others, you need to define resource. And you need to have governance in place. Because I heard Michael saying earlier on that governance and investment risk go hand in hand. So there's a lot of work around this table, and I have the impression that it's not acknowledged. People don't see it. I think the private parties, they need this to move on, because if this doesn't happen within this and maximum 2 years, private parties will step out. And it will be a missed opportunity, because we cannot spend every year again $10 or $15 million, because there is no governance. It doesn't work like that. Thank you.
Can I make some comment?
Sure.
Just one point. I find it's a big contradiction. On one side, we have a sort of promising that a lot of work has been done beyond. Let me not be misunderstood. I'm not saying that we have not developed on the resource estimation. Resource estimation, a lot of work has been done, commendable work has been done by almost all the contractors. I'm not denying that. But the point is whether in terms of mining technology, development of mining technology and the process technology, whether substantial work has been done. At least I learned from the LTC members that they have not been reported any substantial work in terms of testing of mining technology. And therefore, I'm not able to comprehend the two sort of divergent views.
At least I think that we all agree that we need some standards to do the resource classification. That are the main reasons that we are here for.
So that, also that means we do not know. We do not know what is being done.
Yes, but that's why we have here the contractor, and this is an opportunity to listen.
Good. So that's
okay.
The contractors will get a day and a half of the contractors explaining what they've done and where they're going. So that will be part of the meat of what we do as we go into workshops to move from there into reports.
Okay. We certainly don't mind to extend the discussion. Just we are just with 25 minutes of delay.
Well, actually, I've already suggested that we perhaps delay that last talk till tomorrow, because I think this is a really important discussion we're having right now. Actually, I think this is really the crux of the whole week. If we don't resolve this, the rest of the week is actually.
Okay. Yeah. So we ask guidance from the organization.
Experiments, and we're going to really lose the opportunity to progress this forward. This is not just a technical issue. It is a technical issue. It's a very difficult technical issue, but it's also a commercial issue. It's also a governmental issue. It's a social issue. It's an environmental issue. And if we don't take this opportunity to be working all of these together, this is actually what my talk is all about. I'm just saying it right now. I'm giving you the 5-minute version, or the 2-minute version of my talk instead of the half-hour version. If we don't take this opportunity to work all of those issues in conjunction, I think we're going to have a really missed opportunity here to move things forward quickly. And as Jacques said, I think an aggressive concern that is really interested in moving forward can make something happen very quickly if they're working all these issues in conjunction. But they leave any of them out. If you leave out government interaction, you leave out social concerns, if you leave out environmental issues, you're going to be stopped when you get to the point of implementation or execution of the project.
I think I just want to make a comment on my friend here in front of me that he sees something from different views, the new one contradiction. But actually, if we look at it in the historical context, right, I'm going to make an example, not necessarily dealing with the mineral resources, but when the first time the regulations for the environmental protection of the area it was issued, they were talking about flora in the deep sea. Today, if we do the regulations today, nobody will dare to mention the word flora and fauna because there are no plants in the deep sea. But at that time, it was accepted and it's still written in the regulations. So we have to see this one in the context of historical context as well. When the pioneer constructor, and if I'm not mistaken, as my friend Sudhakar mentioned, it was done with a lot of optimism. Today, we have seen new constructor coming on the game of the deep sea mining with a very different filter approaching the issue. I'm not saying that all constructors have done or are not done the work, but I'm saying the new ones, they're coming with a different vision, and we need to look at them. Maybe they have the right approach. That's all.
Sure. Okay, now we have plenty of time to continue the discussion. More comments? We have Ted. Someone? Okay, Ted.
I'm not sure I have a real comment that I want to make, but I would say that from my perspective as a previous participant in an ocean mining program that was quite successful, and having operated a small company that, among other things, does some consulting and feasibility work in this area, there's actually a lot of activity that's been going on the last few years in terms of mining system development. But the companies or the organizations that are doing this are, maybe rightfully so, quite private. They're as a mining company, they're not going to tell their competitors what they're doing, what their mining machines are like, why their machine may be better or more efficient than someone else's. That's technology that they consider quite proprietary. So I would, I guess, argue the point that there is a lot going on, but you haven't heard about it yet, and we may hear about some of this in the next day or two. But over the last few years, I've seen a lot of activity specifically for nodule mining opportunities.
Thank you. In one of my talks tomorrow, I'll obviously be talking about PERSCO and the PERSCO template and the different categories of resources and reserves and what it takes to make a statement of resource and reserves. And I know we're getting back now to the prime aim of this workshop, but I just wanted to emphasize that when it comes to reporting resources, and particularly, say, inferred resources, under the PERSCO system, there's a fair bit of reasonable expectations that can be brought to apply. We don't need to have definite knowledge of exactly how we would recover the minerals or exactly how we would mine them, but we have to have sufficient confidence that it can reasonably be done. And also when you're defining a resource, it's subject to fairly broad criteria that there must be reasonable prospects of eventual economic extraction. Now there's actually guidance in the template about the word eventual, because that can become quite important. And it says in there that the word eventual could be for certain bulk commodities as long as 50 years.
That's a number that's just been put in there as a guide. And I think you could probably say seabed nodules would fall into that sort of time frame. But it partly goes to emphasize that as far as the reporting of resources goes, it is not necessary to know now exactly how we would mine and recover the minerals from it, but we must have sufficient confidence that it could be done from the work that's already been done. So I think we just try and keep that sort of perspective in mind when we're talking about particularly how to classify resources. Reserves is another issue, of course, but we're talking about resources.
Thank you very much. I think that you touched the point. I mean, the first step is to agree on the classification of resources, and then even in the authority we address already the environmental issues that are fully detailed, and we ask for a lot of the data and a lot of procedures to ensure the protection of the environment of the deep sea. So I think we are able to do this job during this week, frankly.
Sudhakar made some comments about classification systems and the need to make sure that the geology is being captured. And I'm certainly not here to push any system on the ISA to be used or not. So I'm just here to present it as an option to you, along with Crisco as actually one option together. The two of them meet both, I think, your requirements here. The UNFC is a total geologic endowment system. It not only captures the volumes that will ultimately be resources, but it captures the entire volumes that are in place. So it actually captures even volumes that would be left and missed effectively. So in Ted's example, it would be those nodules that were too large for him to capture. Those would still be classified under the UNFC system as an additional recovery source that could be captured at some other day. It would be there. It's part of that endowment in place. All of that is captured. The full geology is measured, and including its uncertainty for various project types. Where the Crisco piece comes in on this is that Crisco guides us into which pieces of that classification can be properly and effectively disclosed to the investing public and to governments to do their planning. So the two pieces working together gives you tremendous value, capturing all of the geology, all of the potential from your reservoirs or deposits, and on the other hand, a tool for disclosing that in an effective and industry standard way. Pat, do you have any other comments?
No, I'd agree with that, and I think we'll emphasise this tomorrow in the descriptions of the UNEC that I know Charlotte's going to give, and I'll talk about Crisco, but they are really part of one entire package now, and they don't compete with each other, if you like. It's a matter of understanding where a project, with the knowledge that's available at the time and the stage of development at that time, where it fits within that entire framework, and whether has it advanced to the point where it fits into the Crisco stage, which is where it becomes potentially commercial, where we're actually looking at the feasibility of mining this. So I think this will come out tomorrow. I agree with David that I think it'll come out tomorrow. The integration of these two systems is really part of one whole system.
In fact, some of you who have concerns about focusing too much on social or governmental or economic issues before you have the technical issues constrained fully, you might find for those deposits, actually you don't need to use the classification categories within the UNFC for the social issues, because you actually don't have a project that's mature enough yet to be worried about those. But a project like Jacques has that is progressing further along, he may find that his projects are actually fitting into areas where they do need to start taking that into account. So I think it may be a very elegant solution that meets the technical needs and the needs for businesses and governments that want to progress things in a more rapid manner.
Can I add to that? From our own experience here in India is that, because I'm not part of the same conversation, those two systems work mutually. If you look at the UNFC, it's a process. It identifies to the developer where they have hotspots or issues that need to be addressed before they can progress down towards a commercial operation. And so the two systems are mutually reinforcing, but they also, the UNFC is signaling to the developer and to whoever is the regulator that there are certain issues that have to be addressed before it goes to the next stage, which is actually the point that Jacques was making, that all projects move at, I don't think you want to be prescriptive and move things along in a very regimented system, but rather use the system to decide if things have been addressed to a certain level, and then move them along.
I say this all the time to people, is that the classification systems aren't boxes that you're putting volumes in. That's not the way to think about them. That's like stamp collecting, just adding things in there. It's of interest, but it's of no value at the end of the day. What's really important is the barriers between the classifications. Why have I chosen to put it in that category and not the category that's more mature of it? What is the barrier that's keeping me from progressing that? Once I start to identify those, I then know, do I need to go to a geologist to solve this problem? Do I need to go to an engineer? Do I need to go to a lawyer? Do I need to go to an economist? It helps me to drive the progression of these volumes through to production, which is the goal of clearly everybody in the room.
You may buy. Any further comments, questions?
I think just listening to the last point from David about and from I live in hope in terms of where we might go tomorrow. I would urge that perhaps when we do hear these two key presentations related to the classification of resources and maybe reserves, that you don't treat them as individual presentations so much, but you do actually spend part of your presentations talking about how they can be integrated into one in the best interests of the seabed authority, in particular within the context of the manganese nodules, because it does seem to me that it is not a pitch for an either-or situation. You yourselves have just pointed out that they can, and if I might say so, should be integrated in the context of why we are here. And in your presentations tomorrow, I would perhaps suggest that you do spend a bit of time speaking to the issue of how that integration can be done, so that in particular it would be helpful to the authority in dealing with this immediate issue of what we need to be, from the contractors, to be able to deal with this issue of applications for extension. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Any more questions or comments? Yes, Sulekha.
Yeah, I believe so. Actually, I think it was, as you are asking anymore, I thought that I will add some more.
We have still 5 minutes.
Yeah, actually I do understand. In fact, I think it's impressive that at the end he has been able to bring in some of our anxieties have been expressed, I think, clearly by you. Actually, I would again emphasize on this point that we have got uncertainties on the ground. There are uncertainties. It may be in terms of geological uncertainties, in terms of environmental uncertainties. There are a number of uncertainties, although we are into this, I think, exploration game almost for 3 decades, some of the contractors. Some of them have gone beyond even. And some of them have closed. Closed any more exploration. I know, in fact, some of the contractors, they just, they have closed their exploration contract, as such exploration activities, and they have been just reporting to us, to LTC, saying that we don't have anything to do with exploration. At the same time, I think, we ask those, contractors, are you there to clearly define, okay, the ground situation as a reserve or a resource? I don't know. At least as a geologist, I don't know. There are uncertainties. So I think it's an important issue here is that at least as an individual, I do feel is that if we can identify those uncertainties, how to close those, closing those areas of gaps that are arriving. Although we have enough information and knowledge, and it required to be addressed in that sense. Thank you.
Of course, the uncertainties must be addressed in any resource classification. I think they do. Okay. Yes.
Well, coming back to the resource, there may be uncertainties, but if you look at the exploration density that has been undertaken by all the contractors, I don't see geological uncertainty in terms of abundance and grade to a large extent. For instance, I have looked at the study of geological modeling by the International Seabed Authority and also looked at some of the Indian studies. And I find that even if you take worst case scenario, and if you are doing an exploration at the grid of, let's say, 15 kilometers, at the level of 75,000 square kilometers, which is the maximum retained area that any contractor has, well, you have achieved plus minus 10% accuracy. Therefore, I would consider that as a very sort of definitive definition for the resource. Yes, when you come to individual nodule field, which could be probably 2,000 square kilometers here, 2,000 here, yes, these will not qualify for that category of resource estimate. I mean, estimation accuracy of 10%, because then your volume, your area gets reduced, and therefore your exploration density requirement goes up. My problem is not in terms of resource. We are in a position to develop a model for resource classification, as I said. My problem is whether we can move from resource to reserve, because this is the requirement by the commission, that you have to report the mineable areas and the reserves categories, not resource categories. My problem is actually in addressing these issues. For instance, mineable areas. Now, mineable areas, the factors involved are plenty. For instance, I asked a question, I mean, wonderful presentation. What do you think will be the kind of cutoff abundance? What will be the impact of cutoff of abundance on the resultant efficiency of collection? We don't have an answer. How will the answer come? The answer will have to come from experimental data. Therefore, we are not in a position to answer these questions specifically. Unlike land-based resources, where the cutoff influences only the economic viability, but in case of nodules, it also impacts how efficient is the collection, how efficiently the collection is able to recover. Therefore, we have a lot of unanswered questions when we have to move from resources to reserve. That is all my concern. Thank you.
Well, Caitlin, you started all this. Do you want to do a final comment?
Okay. The discussion right there, the rules and regulations do say report on reserves, but it's using that technology that Herbert Hoover developed. That the rules do need to be adapted to the Crisco formulation, so that you can report, indicate, and measure resources as well as reserves. So that's one point. And I think that getting the estimates of cost and efficiency of the collector are possible. If you go to a couple small firms and experts, they will at least give you a range that you can use within that, a reasonable range based on their own experience and technology. So that can be used. And as Pat said, you don't
delegates something from the JORC code, and that's for resources to reserves. Deriving an ore reserve without a mine design or mine plan through a process of factoring of the mineral resource is unacceptable. It also goes to add, in order to achieve the required level of confidence in the modifying factors, which is virtually this two axes of the UNFC, appropriate feasibility or pre-feasibility level studies will have been carried out prior to determination of ore reserves. So my point is, when we come to definition of ore reserves, we need to have to be able to do the pre-feasibility and feasibility, and for that we can't discuss this in isolation. We need to create data. We need to create data, which is the gap today, both in terms of mining and in terms of processing. That's all I'm saying.
I agree that that's something that is part of what's supposed to happen during the exploration period. And if it hasn't been done at the end of 15 years, there better be a plan to do it in the next 5 years. I mean, it was always the intent that no one be able to take a part of the seabed and keep other people out without moving toward commercial production. So what the authority has to look for is, if it hasn't been done yet, how is it going to happen? It needs to be more done.
In my understanding, I do not think the 15 years contracts leads to eventually bringing the project into a stream. I think it's just an exploration contract. That's my understanding. I may be wrong. But my understanding is that 15-year contract does not have to lead to a production stage.
But it doesn't have to be renewed.
That's a different question. That's a different question.
And what we're talking about is what happens at the end of that 15-year period. What needs to be shown? Some form of...
That will be a question to continue after this meeting. So I don't want if our Secretary General will want to do a closing remark, or just closing.
I wish to thank everybody for their contributions today. I hope that tomorrow, based on the comments I had earlier, we will progress from what I consider just going about in circles. Let's try and see whether we can achieve what we came here for. If there are additional comments, if there are additional inputs to that process, I'd be very grateful. But going back on this is, you can do this, you can't do that, it's not my objective. There are many holes in the convention. There are many holes in the regulations. We can sit here and ponder those forever. Whether 15 years exploration means you go on to exploitation. I mean, that's a non-starter. It's exploration. Nothing says you do exploration and you're obliged to do anything. We came here with a purpose in mind. I hope that we can continue to address that purpose and get to some point which is reasonably acceptable by our contractors. We have members of the LTC and also the classification experts that are present with us who can guide us. We go forward on this basis. We have to interact, meet more often, see whatever adjustments may be made to the system. But those are the only comments I have, and I would honestly appreciate it if we don't start another conversation at 5:15, 5:20. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we'll end for now. We'll convene tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you.